You ever witness something so outrageous, so wildly unfair, that it makes your blood boil even from behind a screen? Something caught on camera that makes you want to rewind, just to make sure you actually saw what you think you saw? That's exactly what happened in this story. And let me tell you, when the security footage hit the internet, people didn't just get mad, they exploded. It was the kind of moment that sparks debates at dinner tables, coffee shops, and across social media feeds. The kind where every viewer swears they would have done something differently. But here's the thing. What if everything you think you saw wasn't the whole truth? What if that shocking scene had layers no one was ready for? Because today, I'm about to take you deep into the real story behind a single moment that went insanely viral. A man cutting in front of a pregnant woman at a crowded store, and trust me, you're not going to believe what the security footage actually reveals by the end of this video. Before we go any further, let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where someone just completely disrespected you in public? You stood there, stunned, maybe fuming, heart racing, wondering if you should speak up or let it slide. Now imagine you're 9 months pregnant, sore, tired, and just trying to buy a few essentials, and a man suddenly steps in front of you like you don't even exist. No excuse. No glance. Just walks up, cuts the line, and starts talking to the cashier like it's his world, and you're not even in it. That's the moment caught on security cam that turned thousands of internet strangers into furious armchair judges. People called it entitled, misogynistic, unforgivable. But was it? Or did the world jump to conclusions way too fast? You're here because something in the title got you. Maybe it made you angry, maybe curious, maybe even skeptical. But you want answers. And let me promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to get them. Not just what happened, but why it happened, who this man really was, what led up to that moment, and the part of the story no one saw coming. This is more than just a viral clip. It's a mirror held up to society, to how we treat strangers, and how quickly we cancel people before we understand them.
So settle in.
I'm not just going to tell you the story. I'm going to walk you through it like you were right there, step by step, thought by thought. Because trust me, once you understand the full picture, it's going to stick with you long after the video ends. Now, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever been misjudged? Had a moment where people only saw one side of you and ran with it? Maybe it was at work, in school, at a store, or even online, where one action, one look, or one sentence painted a version of you that wasn't the full truth. If you've ever felt that sting, that helpless frustration of being seen through a warped lens, then you're going to connect with this story on a deeper level than most. Because this isn't just about a pregnant woman or a line at a store. It's about assumptions. It's about what happens when people react faster than they reflect. And it's about what unfolds when someone dares to look closer and finds a very different truth hiding behind the headline. The footage in question is only 47 seconds long. No sound, just a camera pointed at the checkout line of a busy urban grocery store. In those few seconds, we see a visibly pregnant woman, probably in her early 30s, wearing leggings, a baggy sweater, and clutching a few small items. She's clearly uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot, and standing patiently behind 2 other customers. Then, just as the person in front of her finishes paying, a tall man wearing a navy coat and baseball cap steps in from the side, almost like he was lurking off camera, and cuts directly in front of her. The cashier looks momentarily confused. The woman opens her mouth as if to say something, but then nothing. She freezes. Her expression drops. And the man? He just starts unloading a basket like he owns the place. Now let me pause right here. That clip, when it hit TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts, exploded. We're talking millions of views within hours. Influencers reposted it with captions like, "This is what's wrong with men these days." Comment sections filled up with people demanding his identity, calling for a public apology, even contacting the store demanding they ban him for life. Hashtags like #entitledman, #pregnantwomanignored, and #public-disgrace started trending. You might have seen it and felt a pit in your stomach. You might have even hit share, outraged. But here's where the story takes a turn no one expected. Because someone, and here's where it gets interesting, decided to do what the internet rarely does. Ask questions. A bystander who was actually in the store that day came forward with a different angle. They uploaded their own smartphone video. It was shaky, yes, but it captured a few more seconds than the original clip. In this version, you hear something just barely over the din of a store. The man saying something quickly to the cashier, almost breathlessly. And then the cashier nods. That tiny moment, almost lost in the chaos, started to shift the entire narrative. And from there, a full investigation unfolded that changed everything. You see, in today's world, we're wired to react fast. Viral videos hit us like emotional grenades. Outrage gets clicks, and the more fired up we are, the more we share. But what happens when the truth is quieter than the drama? When there's a deeper context hiding behind a 2-second clip? That's what makes this story different. That's what makes it worth watching until the very last second. Because behind this man's rude action was a motive no one could have predicted, something that shook even the most judgmental viewers to their core. Throughout this video, we're going to introduce you to the key people in this moment, not just the pregnant woman and the man, but the cashier, the store manager, and even someone who recognized the man from an earlier visit. We'll hear directly from eyewitnesses. We'll look at the extended footage. And most importantly, we'll reveal what really happened in the moments before and after the clip, information that the original upload didn't include, but that changes everything. This story will make you feel things: frustration, sympathy, maybe even guilt. It'll challenge your assumptions. It'll make you think twice the next time you see a viral clip and feel the urge to judge. Because while everyone was busy pointing fingers, the truth, the real truth, was sitting just outside the frame, waiting to be uncovered. And once you know it, there's no unseeing it. So stay with me. Don't skip around. You're going to want to hear every piece of this puzzle because, I promise, the twist coming at the end of this story is something no one saw coming. Not the viewers, not the people in the store, and definitely not the millions who thought they knew exactly what they saw. You're here for answers, and I'm going to give them to you. But to understand the ending, you need to understand the full journey. Trust me, the final reveal will leave you speechless. And it all starts with a man, a line, and a decision that lit the internet on fire. But what if I told you he wasn't cutting? What if I told you he was running out of time? The truth is seconds away. And it changes everything. Just a few days before that now viral moment at the grocery store, the man in the navy coat, whose name, as we'd later learn, was Eric Lansing, had been living what most would call a painfully average life. Nothing about him screamed for attention. He worked as a technician for a local heating and air company, a job he'd held quietly for over 9 years. He kept to himself, paid his bills on time, and according to his neighbors in that modest Cleveland suburb, he was friendly but private. The kind of guy who waved politely but didn't stop to chat. Yet here he was, suddenly at the center of a digital firestorm, his name and face plastered across trending hashtags like #linecutter and #disrespectfulman, with strangers dissecting his posture, his silence, even the way he held his basket. But beneath that composed exterior, Eric's life had been unraveling in ways no one on the internet could have imagined, and if they had known, if they had even paused long enough to ask, they might have realized that this wasn't about a man being rude. This was about a man desperately racing against a clock. 2 weeks prior, Eric's younger sister, Monica, had been admitted to the ICU following a severe asthma attack that left her unconscious and reliant on a ventilator. She was a single mother of 2 kids, and Eric had stepped in to help with everything: rides to school, grocery runs, phone calls with nurses. Though he never said it out loud, those around him noticed the toll it was taking. His eyes looked tired, and he stopped showing up to his weekly trivia nights, something he rarely missed. His coworkers whispered about the change, how he'd started leaving early or disappearing without notice. One even joked that Eric's gone ghost mode, but the truth was, he was simply overwhelmed. That morning, yes, the same morning as the incident, he'd gotten a call from Monica's doctor saying her condition had taken a sudden turn. They needed a family member present immediately to authorize a new treatment, something experimental that required on-the-spot consent. Eric had already been on his way to the hospital, but remembered he needed to pick up a specific kind of pediatric cough syrup for Monica's youngest daughter, who had been up all night coughing. He darted into the store, rushed through the aisles, and that's when the footage we all saw begins. But none of that context made it into the video, of course. That's the thing about security cameras. They capture actions, not motives. They show us what people do, but not why. And in an age where first impressions are made in milliseconds, those missing whys get filled in with whatever fits our personal worldview. And while Eric's actions might have seemed cold and dismissive, there was something else, barely perceptible unless you were really looking. The tightness in his jaw. The way his hands trembled slightly as he handed items to the cashier. The brief glance over his shoulder, like he wasn't just in a hurry, but being chased by something invisible. These weren't the gestures of entitlement. They were symptoms of panic. Still, for every piece of context that seemed to humanize Eric, there was another that made the situation murkier. Some online sleuths quickly dug up an old Yelp review from 2 years ago in which a user with the same name had allegedly berated a female employee at a coffee shop for ignoring him. Others found a grainy Facebook photo showing Eric standing with a group at a protest that had turned heated. Though the caption clearly stated it was a peaceful gathering, the image alone was enough to start new rumors. Commenters began speculating. Maybe Eric had a history of hostility toward women. Maybe this wasn't an isolated event, but part of a pattern. The theories grew louder than the facts. And that's when the real mystery began to unfold, not just about Eric's behavior in the store, but about who was feeding these flames. Because almost as quickly as the video went viral, it became clear that someone wanted this moment to spiral out of control. The original upload hadn't come from a random customer. It had been posted by a local viral content account with a history of controversial edits. They had slowed the footage at just the right moment to make Eric's movement appear more deliberate, cutting it off before the cashier nodded or spoke. The caption? Disgusting. Man ignores 9 months pregnant woman like she's invisible. Watch what happens next. It was bait and the internet swallowed it whole. But here's the twist. When store officials were asked to review the footage, they noticed something strange. The angle that had gone viral didn't match any of the mounted security cameras. It had been filmed from a mobile device, tucked somewhere near the store's floral section. Someone had been waiting, and that raised a new set of questions. Was this a planned setup? Was Eric targeted? And if so, why him? Now we begin to dig into Eric's recent encounters, subtle ones, easily dismissed at first, but suddenly more suspicious in hindsight. 3 days before the grocery store incident, Eric had reported that someone had tried to tamper with his car's brake line. The mechanic said it could have been corrosion, but Eric wasn't so sure. Then there was the anonymous note slipped under his door, with nothing but the words, "She deserved better," scribbled across it. At the time, he'd chalked it up to some strange coincidence, maybe even a mistaken identity. But as more details surfaced, the lines between coincidence and intention began to blur. Then there's the woman in the video, the pregnant woman everyone was so quick to defend. Her name was Alyssa Boyd, a schoolteacher known in her community for her kindness and generosity. She had no connection to Eric on the surface, and she herself posted a statement a day after the footage exploded, saying she didn't want the situation to go further. "I was caught off guard," she wrote, "but I understand people have their reasons. I don't want anyone harassed." Her post was sincere, even gracious. But the internet didn't let it go. And the more she tried to downplay it, the more people began to speculate that she knew more than she was letting on. And so the plot thickened. Now, this wasn't just a story about a man and a line. This was a web of motives, misunderstandings, and maybe even manipulation. Every person involved seemed to be hiding something or protecting someone. Viewers started poring over background details in the footage. A man in a red hoodie who kept looking at Eric from aisle 6, a woman pretending to browse magazines but subtly recording with her phone. Were they just customers? Or part of something larger? The deeper you go, the less clear everything becomes. And that's what makes this story so fascinating and so important to stick with until the end. Because the truth, it's layered. And as each piece gets pulled back, we find out that maybe Eric wasn't the only one being misjudged. Maybe we all were. As Eric tried to make sense of the wildfire of rumors, clipped footage, and online accusations, something inside him refused to stay silent. He wasn't the type to chase drama or go public, but this wasn't just a social media storm. It was threatening his job, his reputation, even his ability to care for his sister's kids. His employer had already called him in for a conversation about the optics, and neighbors who once waved now seemed to avoid eye contact. Determined to set the record straight, Eric reached out to the grocery store manager and requested to see the full, unedited surveillance footage. At first, the manager seemed sympathetic. He even admitted that the version going around was misleading. But the very next day, Eric received an email saying the footage had been accidentally deleted due to a system error. Just like that, the one thing that could have cleared his name was gone. Eric didn't buy it. Not for a second. There was something too convenient about the timing, too polished in the phrasing. The store claimed the footage was lost, but he remembered a specific sign near the checkout counter boasting that all videos were stored on a cloud backup for security and liability purposes. So which was it? A system error, or something being intentionally erased? And if someone wanted that footage gone, then who exactly was pulling the strings? That's when Eric got his first anonymous call. It was late at night, well past 1 a.m. His phone buzzed once, then stopped. No number showed. Just a voicemail. The voice on the recording was low and distorted, almost like it was being run through a filter. Stop digging. You think this is about a video? You don't know the half of it. Walk away, or it gets worse. That was it. No name, no explanation. Just a threat that sent a cold pulse through Eric's chest. He didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat in the dark trying to connect dots that refused to align. The next morning, he visited Alyssa Boyd, the pregnant woman from the video. He found her address through a mutual friend of Monica's, and while it felt invasive, he needed answers. Alyssa was understandably surprised to see him at her door, but after a long pause, she stepped outside to talk. She didn't seem angry, just weary, like she was stuck in a situation that had spun wildly beyond her control. "I never wanted this to happen," she said softly, eyes darting toward the street. "I didn't even notice you had cut in front of me until I saw the video. I was texting my husband about my contractions. Honestly, I didn't feel disrespected, but someone sure wanted it to look that way." Eric pressed her gently. Had anyone contacted her about the footage? Had she seen who was filming? Alyssa hesitated. She looked like she wanted to say something more, then shook her head. "It's better if you leave it alone," she murmured. "It's not worth what they'll do."
They.
That word stuck with Eric like a splinter. Back at home, Eric began going through old texts, emails, anything that might shed light on what was really happening. That's when he found something he had long forgotten, a message chain from over a year ago with a man named Julian Cross. Julian had been an old friend turned acquaintance, someone Eric had met through Monica's ex. The two had briefly worked together on a renovation project. But their friendship ended suddenly, without much explanation. The last message from Julian was strange. "You should have stayed out of it. You don't know who you're crossing." At the time, Eric had brushed it off as drama surrounding Monica's messy breakup. Her ex had owed money, gotten into trouble with some questionable people, and vanished soon after. But now, thinking back to the anonymous call, the deleted footage, and the increasingly tangled threads, Eric began to wonder if that falling out wasn't as random as it once seemed. Determined to get more information, Eric reached out to Julian through an old contact. Surprisingly, Julian agreed to meet. Only at night, only at a public place. They met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, and from the moment Eric walked in, he knew something was off. Julian looked nervous, constantly scanning the room, speaking in hushed tones like someone being watched. He told Eric that the viral video wasn't a coincidence, that someone was deliberately targeting him. "There are people who want to control the narrative," he said. "You stepped on the wrong toes when you got involved with Monica's case. You remember that night she called the police? That wasn't just about her ex." Eric's mind raced. He did remember the night Monica called for help, when she claimed someone had broken into her place, but nothing was stolen. The cops had brushed it off as a false alarm, saying there was no sign of forced entry. But Monica had sworn up and down that someone had been inside, watching her from the hallway. She'd started sleeping with the lights on, even installed cameras. And now here was Julian, hinting that it hadn't been paranoia after all. Before Eric could ask more, Julian stopped cold. His eyes locked on something or someone outside the diner window. "I shouldn't be seen with you," he muttered, tossing a crumpled napkin onto the table. "Don't call me again." He slipped out the back door and was gone. Eric unfolded the napkin. Inside were 4 words. The camera wasn't theirs. What did that mean? If the store didn't own the camera that captured the footage, then who did? And why were they filming that specific moment? Someone had gone to great lengths to frame a narrative, possibly to discredit Eric, possibly to silence him. But there was still too much Eric didn't understand. When he returned home, he found his apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing. Nothing was damaged. But on his kitchen table was a small plastic envelope, the kind you'd use for memory cards. Inside was a single SD card with no label, just a sticky note that read, "Still want the truth?" Eric froze. Eric stared at the SD card, its tiny form somehow radiating a weight far beyond its size. He didn't touch it at first, just stood there, the silence of the apartment so loud it made his heartbeat feel like thunder in his ears. Someone had been inside. Someone who didn't just want to scare him now, they wanted him to see something. And they had gotten in without tripping the door alarm or leaving any visible sign of forced entry. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching. They were tracking his every move, every conversation, every suspicion. And now they had chosen to escalate. He cautiously slid the card into his laptop and held his breath as the screen came to life. The folder popped open with a single file inside, titled with a timestamp, just a week before the incident at the grocery store. As the video played, Eric's face went pale. It was grainy, filmed from a distance, but unmistakably real. The footage showed him sitting at a park bench, talking to his niece, while she played with her sketchpad. But the audio was what made the hair on his neck stand up, clear as day. His niece said, "Monica said the man with the star tattoo came to her window again. She scared Uncle Eric." He had completely forgotten about that moment. He had thought she was just repeating something she overheard, some anxious childhood misinterpretation. But now it was captured, archived, and delivered back to him by someone who was listening too. Just then his phone buzzed. A text from Monica. Simple. Urgent. "They came to my job. I need to see you. Now." Without thinking, Eric grabbed his keys and bolted from the apartment, heart racing, SD card still in his laptop. When he reached Monica's workplace, a small animal clinic on the edge of town, he found her in the break room, trembling, clutching a small yellow envelope like her life depended on it. She didn't wait for him to speak. She simply handed it over, her eyes rimmed with tears. Inside was a photo, recently printed. It was of Monica, taken from behind as she walked into the clinic that morning. Scribbled across the bottom in thick red marker were the words, "You weren't supposed to talk." Alongside it was a second photo, this one of Monica's dog, Charlie, sitting in their fenced backyard, taken from outside the gate. There was no note, no address, just these chilling reminders that someone was watching them both far too closely. Eric's mind reeled. This wasn't just about a viral video anymore. This was targeted surveillance. Someone had been tailing them, documenting not just Eric's movements, but Monica's, and now even dragging his niece into the equation. He began to see a pattern, a sequence that felt more orchestrated than random. What if this entire viral moment at the grocery store wasn't spontaneous at all? What if it was a setup designed to destroy Eric's credibility right before something bigger broke loose? Desperate for answers, Eric remembered the napkin Julian had left behind at the diner. The camera wasn't theirs. He ran the phrase through every possible angle in his mind. What if the camera wasn't a security cam at all? What if someone had planted it specifically to capture a doctored moment? He scoured the internet for other clips from that day, any alternate footage that may have been leaked or filmed from a different angle. That's when he found something strange on a Reddit thread about viral video conspiracies. A user had posted a short, low-resolution clip from what appeared to be the same store and timestamp, only filmed from a slightly higher angle, almost as if from a mounted body cam or a hidden device on a shelving unit. The strange thing? In this version, the camera moved ever so slightly before Eric stepped forward in line, like someone had adjusted it, aware of what was about to happen. And in the background, a man in a dark hoodie with a star tattoo faintly visible on his wrist leaned casually against a pillar. That tattoo. Eric's blood turned cold. It matched the exact one his niece had described. The same man Monica had once whispered about in fear. The same man Julian may have been referring to when he warned Eric about stepping on the wrong toes. But who was he? And how was he connected to everything unraveling around them? Before Eric could dig further, Monica's phone lit up with another message, this time not a threat, but something eerier. A photo of Eric, standing in front of his laptop just hours earlier, staring at the SD card before he inserted it. The angle wasn't from the door or window. It was from inside the apartment. Someone had planted a camera, maybe more than one. The message underneath read, "Keep looking, and you'll find more than you want." Suddenly, nothing felt safe. Every room had the weight of unseen eyes. Every sound carried the paranoia of hidden microphones. Eric felt the tension in his spine tighten with every breath. It was clear now that they weren't just reacting, they were being manipulated. Every move Eric made was anticipated, calculated, and pushed in a direction by someone who had far more access to their lives than they'd ever realized. But the real question wasn't just who was behind it.
It was why.
And that answer would only come if Eric and Monica were willing to keep going, no matter how dangerous the next step would be. But just when Eric thought he had a small grasp on the direction of this chaos, Monica hesitated, pulled something from her purse, and handed him a receipt, barely legible, dated 2 years ago, from a warehouse facility on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't hers. It had been slid under her windshield that morning with a sticky note attached that simply said, "It started here." Eric stared at the crumpled receipt like it held the key to a locked room in his own memory. The warehouse address was barely readable under faded ink and water damage, but there was something about it that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts, familiar, but distant, like a half-remembered dream. As Monica nervously paced behind him, he opened his phone and tried to look up the location, but his screen suddenly flickered, then went black.
Dead.
Fully charged just moments ago, now unresponsive. At first, he assumed it was a glitch. But then Monica's phone, which had been resting on the counter, buzzed once, then shut off completely. No warning, just silence. A creeping chill ran down Eric's spine. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Someone was cutting off their digital oxygen, trying to blind them, to isolate them. And it was working. They decided to drive to the address on the receipt without another word. The air between them was tense, thick with unspoken fear. As they pulled onto the highway, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time he changed lanes, a black sedan seemed to follow in kind, maintaining distance but never falling completely behind. At first, he rationalized it, maybe just another driver on a similar route. But after 3 exits and a sharp detour through a service road, the car was still there. Not tailgating, not aggressive. Just present. Watching. Following. Eric's pulse began to race. He took another unexpected turn into a grocery store parking lot, parked, and waited. The black sedan rolled by slowly, never stopping, but as it passed, he saw the driver for the first time, a woman with mirrored sunglasses and an emotionless expression, hands locked on the wheel like she was being directed by someone else. Monica saw her too. "I've never seen her before," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I think she's been following me since last week." They didn't go straight to the warehouse after that. First, they stopped by a nearby gas station, hoping to use a payphone to call Julian, but the line was dead. Eric tried using the store's phone, but the manager said it had just gone down 10 minutes ago. "Technical issue," he mumbled, scratching his head. "Happens once in a blue moon." The timing was too perfect, too orchestrated. Monica pulled Eric aside, her voice cracking. "This isn't random, Eric. They're cutting off every way we can reach out. We're being boxed in." Eric nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He was beginning to feel it too, that suffocating pressure that comes when someone pulls strings behind your back, when every move you make feels like it was decided before you even thought of it. When they finally reached the warehouse, night had already fallen. The lot was empty, the building long abandoned, its windows boarded up, the sign on the chain-link fence half torn and sun-bleached. Marinex Shipping and Freight, it read. Eric had never heard of it, but something deep in his gut told him this was the place. The fence wasn't locked, just wired shut loosely, like someone had wanted to make it look secure without actually keeping anyone out. As they crept inside, Monica's flashlight flickered across dusty shipping crates and forgotten office furniture. It smelled like mold and old metal. But then, something strange, a humming noise, low and rhythmic, coming from deeper inside the building. They followed the sound until they reached a stairwell that descended into what looked like a basement or storage level. The humming grew louder. Monica hesitated. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered, her eyes scanning the darkness. But Eric pressed forward, each step echoing ominously down the narrow metal stairs. When they reached the bottom, they found a makeshift office, completely different from the rest of the decaying structure. It was clean. Too clean. Recently used. A single desk with a monitor still glowing, showing grainy surveillance footage of multiple locations. Monica's clinic, Eric's apartment, the grocery store, even the park where his niece played. Every screen had a timestamp. Every screen showed them being watched. There was no mistaking it now. They weren't just being followed. They were the center of someone's project, like lab rats in an invisible maze. Then came the noise. Upstairs. A sharp bang. The sound of metal hitting concrete. Then another. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Eric's eyes met Monica's, and in that moment, the fear crystallized. They weren't alone. He grabbed her hand and pulled her behind one of the crates. The monitor behind them went black. Whoever had followed them wasn't hiding anymore. They were making it known. And then, as they crouched in breathless silence, a phone rang. Eric's. It had been dead an hour ago, and yet there it was, ringing in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands. No caller ID. He hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "You were warned. You've brought her into something she can't survive. Walk away, or she disappears next." The line went dead. Monica stared at Eric, her lips quivering as tears welled in her eyes. What do they mean? Why me? Eric didn't know how to answer. He didn't know if he had just endangered the only person he had left who still trusted him. He didn't know if he could still trust himself. But the timing, the threats, the surveillance, none of this was random. There was something in Eric's past, or maybe Monica's, that someone desperately didn't want uncovered. A secret, a connection, something buried, and now resurfacing with violent urgency. But before he could process it all, they heard a faint clicking sound behind them. A small red light blinked once on the wall. Then the power cut out. Just as the silence began to stretch unbearably long in the pitch-black basement, the emergency lighting buzzed to life, casting a weak, reddish glow across the room. Eric's heart thundered in his chest, each beat louder than the last, while Monica stood frozen beside him, her wide eyes fixed on the blinking red light that had triggered it all. For a moment, neither of them moved. And then, through the low hum of backup power, they heard the faint sound of footsteps again, but this time, they weren't coming down the stairs. They were already in the room. Eric spun around, holding the weak flashlight beam toward the far corner. There stood a man, calm, older, dressed like a maintenance worker, holding a large duffel bag. But something about the way he looked at them, like he'd been waiting for this meeting, made Eric's breath catch in his throat. Monica instinctively stepped behind Eric, but the man held up his hand slowly, his voice calm, deliberate. "You don't know what you're involved in, Eric. But you were never supposed to." Eric's eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" The man stepped forward, placing the duffel bag on the floor. "Because I used to work with your father. Before everything fell apart." The room dropped into silence as those words landed. Eric stumbled back a step, shaking his head. "My father died 20 years ago. You don't know what you're talking about." But the man just sighed and opened the bag. Inside were dozens of neatly organized files, thumb drives, and photographs, some of them of Eric as a child, others of Monica. and others of people Eric didn't recognize but felt instinctively were tied to the mess they were now caught in. Your father didn't die in a car accident, the man continued, and it wasn't random.
It was a cleanup job.
He was part of a classified surveillance operation run through a private defense contractor. He uncovered something he wasn't supposed to, something that tied the company back to experimental behavioral tracking through civilian platforms. Social media, grocery store loyalty cards, even school records. Everything was data. Eric felt his knees weaken, like the floor had just shifted underneath him. His father? Surveillance? It didn't make sense. And yet, looking at the files, he couldn't deny the photos were real. But then came the part that made his blood run cold. The man turned to Monica. And you were never supposed to be in this either. But you're not just collateral damage. You were part of the test group, Monica. You've been monitored since you were 17. Monica looked like someone had just ripped the air from her lungs. She stumbled backward, shaking her head violently. That's not possible. I would have known. I would have seen something. No, the man said quietly. You wouldn't. That's the whole point. Eric reached into the bag and grabbed one of the thumb drives, plugging it into the computer still barely powered by backup. A set of files loaded slowly, project names, timestamps, encrypted communications. One folder stood out. Test Cluster 8, Monica R. Inside were years of data logs, photos, even psychiatric evaluations from places Monica swore she'd never even been to. But the most damning file was a video, low quality, timestamped 7 years ago, of Monica speaking with someone in what looked like a hospital room. You said I'd be helping people, she said on the recording. That I'd never remember this part. Monica collapsed into the chair behind her, tears welling in her eyes. That's not me. That can't be me. But the voice was hers. The expression, unmistakably hers. The man stepped forward again, slower this time. You were part of a long-term behavioral experiment, Monica. And they wiped your memory after each check-in. That man you think cut in line that day? That was a trigger point. A stress marker designed to test your reaction to a false injustice. But something went wrong. You remembered. Eric turned to her slowly. The pieces began to twist and lock into place in his head, rearranging everything he thought he knew. The strange look on Monica's face that day. The way she froze, like déjà vu wrapped in fear. And the woman in the black sedan? She wasn't watching Monica. She was assigned to intervene if Monica's programming failed. The twist hit like a freight train. Monica wasn't the victim. She was the variable. But before Eric could say a word, the lights flickered again, and then everything went black. The room remained cloaked in blackness as the backup lights gave out completely, plunging Eric and Monica into a silence that was more terrifying than any sound. The air grew heavier, denser, as though the truth itself was closing in around them, suffocating them both. Eric gripped Monica's arm, trying to steady them as the hum of the building's systems faded to nothing. Somewhere above them, something creaked, and then a sharp thud echoed like a warning. But this time, Eric wasn't just reacting to fear. He was paralyzed by the weight of what he now knew. His father's death wasn't an accident. Monica, the woman he had trusted more than anyone in his life, wasn't who she thought she was. And the only person offering answers had just vanished with the lights. They stumbled their way upstairs, flashlight flickering like it was barely clinging to life. When they reached the surface level, the night outside was colder, darker than before. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Eric turned to Monica, his voice cracking under the strain. How could you not know? How could you go this long without realizing you were being watched, controlled? Monica looked up at him with eyes that were both furious and broken. You think I didn't feel something was wrong? You think I haven't lived with that feeling every day of my life, that something inside me doesn't belong to me? I begged doctors. I talked to therapists. Every time I got close to something real, I'd wake up 2 days later with no memory of the session. You think I haven't tried? Eric stepped back, the pain in her voice cutting deeper than he expected. He had come looking for justice, for clarity, but what he found was something far worse. They weren't just being hunted. They were being used. He suddenly remembered something else. The man in the footage, the one who started it all at the grocery store. It wasn't just about being rude. He was carrying a badge clipped to his belt that Eric hadn't noticed at first, something federal. What if the altercation was never meant to go public? What if Monica was never meant to be triggered in front of a camera? That's when his phone vibrated again. A new message. No number. Just 5 words that chilled him to the bone. Choose. Her or the files. Eric stared at the screen, unable to breathe. This was no longer about chasing the truth. This was a trap, and someone had been pulling the strings since the very beginning. He turned the phone toward Monica, who read the message and froze. "What do they mean?" she whispered. But Eric already knew. They wanted to erase this just like they did with his father. But instead of killing him, they were going to make him choose between burning the evidence or losing Monica entirely. Hours later, they sat in the dark safety of a cheap motel just outside the city, lights off, curtains drawn, files spread across the bed in chaotic piles. Eric couldn't stop shaking. Every few seconds he glanced at Monica, wondering if there were more pieces of her past she hadn't yet uncovered, or worse, pieces she had and was still hiding. She noticed the way he looked at her. "You don't trust me anymore, do you?" she asked, her voice hollow. Eric didn't answer right away. How could he? What kind of man would he be if he just trusted blindly again after everything? But at the same time, part of him still wanted to believe in her. In who she was now, not who she might have been programmed to be. And that was the cruelest part of it all. The system didn't just monitor or manipulate. It destroyed relationships from the inside out, until all that was left was suspicion and isolation. The following morning, Eric left the motel before dawn without telling Monica. He needed answers from someone he hadn't spoken to in years, his Uncle Darren. Darren had been close to Eric's father before the accident, a man who abruptly cut ties with the family after the funeral and disappeared into a remote cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Eric remembered him as paranoid, constantly checking locks, shredding mail, muttering about government satellites and data leaks. At the time, Eric had dismissed it as mental illness brought on by grief. But now he wasn't so sure. Maybe Darren had known the truth all along and ran before they could silence him too. It took half a day to find the trail, but when Eric reached the cabin, it looked deserted, until he saw the smoke rising from the chimney. He approached cautiously, knocking on the door twice before it creaked open. And there stood Darren, older, thinner, with eyes that seemed too sharp for a man living off-grid. He looked Eric up and down, then nodded once. "I was wondering how long it would take before they sent you." Eric stepped inside, heart pounding. "I'm not here for them." Darren's lips curled into a grim smile. "Then you're already in more danger than you know." Inside the cabin, Darren showed Eric boxes of journals, maps, and files his father had sent him before he died, or was killed. Much of it centered around the same contractor the mystery man had mentioned. Names that didn't show up in any official registry, photos of supposed research facilities in Utah, Nevada, and deep in the Carolinas. And then came the part that made Eric feel physically ill. Darren pulled out an old photo of a girl, barely a teenager, sitting in a sterile white room. The name on the back. Subject 8R, Monica R. "You want the truth?" Darren asked. She wasn't just monitored. She was built, conditioned from the ground up to be exactly who she is now. And she's not the only one. As Eric stared at the photo, his mind spiraled. All at once, the ultimatum made sense. The files in his possession didn't just incriminate a few rogue agents. They held proof of a nationwide behavior modification project that had reached further than anyone could imagine. And Monica wasn't just the variable anymore. She was the linchpin. But before he could say anything, a single shot rang out through the cabin's window, and Darren dropped to the floor, blood pooling around his chest. Eric dove for cover, heart racing, realizing too late that he had been followed. The files were compromised. Monica was exposed. And now the people hunting them weren't going to give him another choice. They were coming to erase everything. Eric's lungs burned as he sprinted through the tree line behind the cabin, Darren's final words echoing in his ears like a haunting riddle. He didn't even have time to mourn. There was no room left for grief in a world where the line between memory and manipulation had blurred beyond recognition. The gunshot was still ringing in his head, not because of the sound itself, but because of what it meant. The people behind this weren't just watching. They were cleaning up, silencing, erasing. And if they were willing to kill Darren in cold blood, there was no doubt Monica was next, or worse, already gone. His phone buzzed as he reached the edge of the forest where his car was parked. Another anonymous message lit up the screen. This time, no threat. Just a chilling timestamp. 9:17 p.m. Plaza Tower. 11th floor. Final offer. No explanation, no sender, just an address and a deadline. Eric's blood turned cold. Whoever they were, they didn't care about being found anymore. They wanted control. This wasn't about Monica's outburst in the grocery store, or even his father's mysterious death. That footage, what started as a viral security clip, was a spark, something that threatened to ignite a truth they'd spent years hiding. And now they were putting the fire out, one person at a time. Eric drove in silence, headlights carving through the early evening fog like blades. Traffic blurred around him. Everything felt distant, abstract. The world kept spinning, unaware that beneath the surface, people were being erased, real lives, real memories, rewritten or deleted completely. And now that he'd seen the files, read his father's warnings, and held the classified photos in his hands, there was no going back. He reached Plaza Tower at 9:04 p.m., heart thundering like a war drum. The streets were too quiet for a Friday night in the city. Too clean. Like someone had cleared the board in anticipation of a final move. He took the elevator to the 11th floor, each ding echoing louder than the last. When the door slid open, Eric wasn't prepared for what he saw. The hallway was lined with monitors, dozens of them, each showing different angles of people he knew. Monica, yes, but also his high school teacher. A neighbor from childhood. The barista he used to flirt with every morning. His own mother. All being watched in real time, each tagged with a code and profile data. And at the end of the corridor stood Agent Carlisle, the same federal man from the grocery store.
Calm.
Clean-shaven. Too polite to be real. He smiled like a politician, hands behind his back. "You're early," Carlisle said, as if this were a casual business meeting. "That shows initiative." Eric didn't answer. His fists clenched involuntarily. "You think this is about you? About Monica?" Carlisle's voice stayed cool, almost bored. "She was just a test subject. We've been running the real program for years, across schools, hospitals, prisons. The footage going viral? That wasn't a mistake. That was a trigger. We needed to see how the public would react if one of our prototypes malfunctioned in the wild." Eric's stomach flipped. "You used her." Carlisle tilted his head. "We used all of you." Before Eric could charge forward, the side door clicked open and Monica walked in, flanked by two other agents. But it wasn't the Monica he remembered. Her expression was blank, robotic. There was no warmth in her eyes. No fear. Carlisle smiled wider, stepping aside. She came back on her own. That's the beauty of psychological reinforcement. When the system's in place long enough, they return to the nest. Eric stepped back, shaking his head.
No.
"You're lying.
She's not one of them."
She fought this. Carlisle walked toward him slowly, measured. "Did she?
Or was that part of the design?"
We needed you to believe in her. We needed someone like you. Angry, broken, curious enough to dig, but naive enough to believe that you were saving her. She was never the key, Eric. You were." The weight of that sentence slammed into him like a punch to the gut. This entire time, he had thought he was uncovering a mystery, rescuing someone. But in reality, he'd been led here, step by step, like a lab rat in a maze. The betrayal hit harder than any weapon could have. Darren's death, the files, the threats, they weren't failures of the system. They were the system. He was the variable they wanted to test. And now, the test was over. But something inside him refused to break. He looked at Monica, really looked, and saw a flicker. A twitch at the corner of her mouth. A micro-expression she used to make when she was uncomfortable. Eric knew then that she was still in there, buried under layers of conditioning. She hadn't come back willingly. She had come back because she had no other choice. "Then let her choose," Eric said, voice steady despite the quake in his hands. Let her speak for herself. Carlyle laughed quietly. That's not how this works. But don't worry. You'll understand everything once the transition is complete. You'll forget about Darren, about the files, about this conversation. You'll wake up in your apartment, safe, ordinary, just like everyone else. We'll give you a good life. Eric backed toward the elevator, heart pounding like it would explode. He knew what was coming next. They weren't going to kill him. They were going to erase him, his mind, his memories, his truth. And Monica? They would reset her again. Make her someone else. He had only seconds to decide, to act, to save what little was left. But just as he reached for the call button, the lights flickered, and this time, Monica moved. Monica didn't speak as the lights dimmed and the hallway monitors flickered, just a subtle twitch in her right hand, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but unmistakable to Eric. That was the sign. The same unconscious move she always made when she was terrified but pretending to be composed. She was still in there. Somewhere beneath the programming, beneath the manipulation and cold conditioning, they hadn't erased her completely. Eric froze for half a second, everything around him slowing down, every breath coming heavy as a concrete wall. Carlyle kept talking, calmly gesturing toward the monitors like a man giving a corporate tour, boasting about psychological warfare, behavioral conditioning, crowd simulation algorithms. He had no idea that control was slipping through his fingers at that very moment. Then it happened. Monica lunged, fast, mechanical, her movements too precise to be natural. For a split second, Eric thought she was attacking him, and his heart nearly stopped.
But she didn't strike.
She grabbed the agent closest to Carlyle, twisting his arm with ruthless efficiency and slamming his head into the glass wall. Shards flew. Carlyle jumped back, hand reaching under his jacket, but Eric tackled him before the gun was fully drawn. They crashed into the console, sparks bursting from exposed wires. Eric punched him hard across the jaw. Once, twice. Years of rage and confusion exploding in a single moment of clarity. Carlyle scrambled to his feet, bleeding and snarling, but it was too late. Monica was already hacking the main control panel, her fingers moving like she had done it 1,000 times before. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd been deeper in this system than anyone ever realized. The monitors blinked, each one showing looping footage of empty corridors, empty streets, fake faces. Then suddenly, real-time feeds from hundreds of hidden cameras began flashing across the screens. Private homes, medical clinics, churches, even classrooms. Each tagged with tracking IDs and behavioral prediction models. The scope was monstrous. They weren't watching a few targets, they were watching everyone. Carlyle's entire program was laid bare, exposed to Eric and Monica in all its horror. She looked over her shoulder, her voice trembling now, not robotic but raw. They've been using us to run simulations. Emotional reactions. Social experiments. Every interaction, every outburst, it's all been part of a live beta test. We're just variables in their national AI training. Eric staggered back, dizzy from the truth. His father's files. The footage. The viral clip in the grocery store. It was never about the incident, it was about the response it triggered online. Carlyle's team had orchestrated everything, feeding rage, moral outrage, tribal arguments, all to study how Americans reacted under pressure, how quickly they fractured into factions, how easily they could be nudged into chaos or apathy. It was digital manipulation at the deepest level, masked as random acts of injustice and caught on-camera moments. And they had been doing it for years. But there was one final lock on the system. Monica tried to override it, only to find a biometric trigger tied to Carlyle himself. Without it, the footage would be lost. Encrypted.
Erased.
Eric turned to him, bloodied and slumped against the wall, still smiling through cracked teeth. Even if you kill me, it won't change anything. The backups are off-grid. You can't stop the machine. But that was when Monica dropped the last bombshell. You're wrong. We already found her off-grid server. Darren built it. She turned to Eric. That's what he was doing all along. He wasn't just hiding. He was building a mirror system. Everything Carlyle's team uploaded was being copied in real time. Every facial scan, every voice clip, every manipulation script. Carlyle's expression finally cracked.
Fear.
Real, unfiltered fear. Impossible. Eric walked toward him, breathing hard, his voice steady. You picked the wrong people to use as puppets. With a final keystroke, Monica activated the Mirror server's live stream. Across the country, devices began receiving push notifications. Laptops, TVs, phones. A breaking news alert pinged from a major media outlet. Someone had leaked the entire surveillance program to the public. Monica had released everything, bypassing Carlyle's security firewalls using Darren's ghost system. For the first time, Americans saw the truth. The viral videos weren't just shocking moments. They were manufactured psychological landmines, placed carefully to train artificial intelligence on mass behavior and social collapse. The footage of Eric's father's accident was even there. It hadn't been an accident at all. Carlyle lunged again, wild now, desperate. But Eric was ready. He sidestepped and slammed the man against the server tower, knocking him unconscious. Sirens wailed in the distance. Real ones. The agency had probably triggered an alert, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out. And once the people saw it, once they felt it, it couldn't be buried again. But just as Eric and Monica turned to leave, Monica's hands trembled and her knees buckled. She clutched her head, eyes wide with panic. Eric, something's wrong. I can't remember where we are. He rushed to her side, holding her as she collapsed. Her body shook violently. It wasn't a seizure. It was a failsafe. Carlyle had planned for this all along. In the event that any of their assets went rogue, the system had been designed to trigger a neurological shutdown, a synthetic memory wipe, hardwired into their brains through years of exposure. Monica's rebellion had come at a cost. Eric screamed for help, but he knew no one was coming. Not in time. And just before she passed out completely, Monica whispered something so faint, he almost missed it. They're still watching. It had been 3 weeks since the system went down, at least the part the public could see. In that time, the story of the viral video that once showed a man rudely cutting in front of a pregnant woman had been completely redefined in the eyes of millions. What started as a spark of outrage online had unraveled into a government-sanctioned behavioral experiment, engineered and executed with such precision that it made most Americans question every emotionally charged moment they'd ever witnessed on a screen. The footage of Monica, Eric, Carlyle, and even Eric's late father had flooded the internet. News outlets scrambled to catch up with the leaks, trying to verify the mountain of data as the public's trust crumbled by the hour. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Whistleblower protections were being extended. Protesters gathered outside data centers and government buildings from coast to coast, demanding answers and accountability. But even amid the chaos, one truth had taken root in the minds of the people. They had been manipulated, not just by algorithms, but by those who fed the algorithms the fuel of division, fear, and outrage. Eric sat alone on the steps of the old library where he and Monica had once met to compare notes in secret. Now it was just a quiet building, cast in late afternoon shadow. The doors locked, the windows dusty. He held a worn photograph in his hand, one of the few personal items left untouched after the agency had raided his apartment. In it, Monica was smiling, real and unfiltered, before the programming, before the testing, before everything changed. She was still alive, but different now. The doctors had stabilized her body, but her memories came in fragments, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that refused to fit together. Sometimes she recognized Eric, sometimes she didn't. There were moments when she would blink and stare into the distance like she was waiting for a cue, an invisible script to prompt her next move. But he visited her every day, read to her, told her stories of who she was and who they were together before everything fell apart. There were days he thought she might come back fully. There were days he wasn't so sure. The government's official stance was silence. After an initial media frenzy, the powers that be quickly pivoted to damage control, issuing vague statements about unauthorized programs, rogue actors, and the need for national security reform. Carlisle was declared dead after a prison transport crash en route to a federal facility, though Eric knew better. The crash had no witnesses and no body had been recovered. Monica had once mentioned that fail-safe agents like him were rarely imprisoned. They were recycled. If Carlisle was alive, he was likely operating under a new name somewhere else, preparing for the next version of the same nightmare. But Eric wasn't chasing him anymore. That part of the story was over. He had exposed the truth, pulled the curtain back just enough for the world to see the puppeteer's hand. It was up to everyone else now to decide what to do with that knowledge. Across the internet, new forums had sprung up, not conspiracy theory echo chambers, but grassroots movements focused on digital ethics, behavioral transparency, and real human connection. People were starting to question not just the content they consumed, but the emotions that content triggered. Every viral video was now met with a second glance, every emotional reaction second-guessed, as if the entire country had suddenly realized they were part of an invisible experiment that had never ended. The hashtag Think Before You React was trending alongside hashtag We Are Not Variables. In many ways, it felt like the beginning of a digital revolution, not built on rage or fear, but on awareness. Still, not everything had returned to normal. Eric noticed cameras more than he used to. He questioned coincidences, paused before sharing any story that seemed too perfectly dramatic. There was a lingering sense that some parts of the program hadn't gone dark, only gone deeper. And sometimes, when he walked the streets of the city, he'd catch glimpses of familiar faces, someone who looked a little too interested in him, a car that parked in the same place 3 days in a row, a stranger who made eye contact and held it for a beat too long. But he didn't live in fear. Not anymore. Because he knew the truth, and more importantly, so did the world. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the city buzzed with the electric hum of a Friday night, Eric stood from the steps and tucked the photo back into his jacket. He turned one last time toward the dark windows of the library, half hoping he'd see her standing there, waving, smiling the way she used to. She wasn't, but maybe one day she would be. As he walked into the night, a message pinged on his phone, a number he didn't recognize.
It was a video file.
No subject line. No name. Just a timestamp from 2 minutes ago and a location tag, Monica's hospital. His heart skipped. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then he pressed play. The image flickered. And there she was, looking directly into the camera, smiling. Eric, they're building a new one. The screen went black. And just like that, it began again.